Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. What do you do with nuclear waste? Once you've made this stuff, then you got to decide where to put it. And that is the problem. So we are going to talk about that today with two Canadian citizens who are worried about their proximity to the radiation that comes out of nuclear power plants. Because Canada has nuclear power plants, and then we have a lot of waste that we haven't decided where to put. So my first guest is Dr. Sandy Greer, who lives in Blyth, Ontario, in an area that is apparently in the vicinity of one of the proposed repositories for these fissile chemical waste. And in London, Ontario, is Professor Erica Simpson, a political science professor and international relations expert at Western University. And she is also a person who's been very active in following the issue of the disposal of Canadian nuclear waste. And we are also joined by my assistant, my trusty right-hand man, Adam Wynn, who has also been participating in many of these online discussions. Maybe, Sandy, you can begin by telling us what you know about where the problem arose, how much stuff we've got to handle, and where they're thinking of putting it, and how you feel about it.
So I began being involved in the issue of proposed deep geological repositories, which are called DGRs, for nuclear waste in Ontario 10 years ago, as a citizen at that time living on 2 acres in Bruce County, where at that time a low and intermediate level DGR was being proposed. And I was invited to ask my municipal council in South Bruce about the money they were receiving from Ontario Power Generation, because all of the municipalities were being given money by OPG to go along with the project and support the project, which fortunately was voted to be stopped by Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which is 2 sister Anishinaabe communities in Bruce County. So they had the final say about whether that would go forward or not. So they stopped it. And what I bring to all of my research over the past 10 years is a background in journalism and education. So I bring those analytical and investigative tools to doing a lot of independent research to find out about the deep geological repository issue. Currently, a high-level DGR now is being promoted by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, whose stakeholders are all the nuclear reactor owners, such as OPG and other owners in other provinces of Canada. So I became really actively involved through 10 years because I was shocked at the public hearings for the first proposed OPG, the first proposed DGR, because of so many questions which OPG could not answer from Saugeen Ojibwe Nation or any other citizens in the neighboring non-Indigenous communities. There was so much that was not known. And to this day, in my continuing science research, which I do in international science journals, there is still, the science is still not there to justify a DGR. And so it's a huge concern about how much the public concerns are being acknowledged by the federal government. And this is an ongoing issue that more and more citizens need to be actively informed and engaged on this issue, because the science is not there to justify it. And I could speak later about.
Could we get a sense of how many cases have been investigated or proposed? Are they making a choice between 3 or 4 options, or I believe that milestone has been passed and they picked one preferred location. I don't know. Can you tell me just about what the history of this investigation or search for a repository site?
The federal government asked the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is known as NWMO, they asked them to research various options, but ultimately the NWMO chose the Deep Geological Repository option rather than, for example, having the nuclear waste be kept on site at the various large nuclear reactors where people who are against the DGR, citizens and activist groups who have done their own research internationally, including some nuclear scientists who have worked in the nuclear industry internationally, who are against the DGR option, they believe that there should be a rolling stewardship option, that in other words, it would be safer to improve the containers in which the nuclear waste has been stored safely in Ontario, for example, for 40 years at Bruce Power and other nuclear reactors in Ontario, such as Darlington and Pickering. So, so that is an option that is misrepresented by the NWMO, who argues that the current containers can't last for thousands of years, but they misrepresent the rolling stewardship option, which is to replace the current containers with more robust containers, which can be monitored 24/7. And that will not happen if the nuclear waste is buried, 500 or more meters underground. That 24/7 monitoring will not be possible, especially as the years progress.
It's from Angela Bischoff at the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. So Angela notes the total radioactivity of the nuclear waste stored at the Pickering, Darlington, and Bruce nuclear stations is 700 times greater than the total radiation released to the atmosphere by the Fukushima accident in 2011. Since it will be decades before any long-term waste solution is secured, they advocate storing existing high-level nuclear waste, which is currently stored in conventional storage buildings, in safer interim storage, moved as far back from the shoreline as possible, and placed in above-the-ground, attack-resistant reinforced concrete vaults, as they do in some German nuclear facilities. The industry, of course, doesn't want to spend the money. Do you think that the industry should invest in safer interim storage?
Well, I'll answer that question because it's really important that when we built the reactors beginning in the 1950s, they wanted to be close to water. So they situated the Bruce reactor right on the shore of Lake Huron. And then, of course, Pickering is close to Lake Ontario and Darlington. So that was the big mistake. It's like building a house without any toilet and just saying, oh, well, we don't need a bathroom. We'll worry about that in 40, 50 years, what we'll do with our waste. And so that's the fundamental problem, is that way back when we were all very enthusiastic about nuclear power and nuclear energy, and we thought it was a solution, we didn't think about the waste. And so now there are literally, as Angela Bischoff pointed out, there's so much waste that the question is what to do with it. And Sandy has followed this very closely, the concept of burying it, but no country in the world has built an underground vault. Germany did, they tried, they used an old salt mine and the containers leaked. And now it's going to cost them billions of euros to pull all that stuff out. And Fukushima, they're using drones. They can't even remove all the waste that has been left there. And so it's being dumped into the Pacific Ocean. So Canada, we're stewards of the Great Lakes. 40 million people live around the Great Lakes. All those people in the United States are highly affected. And yet here in Canada, people seem to think that a small municipality can decide, a tiny, tiny council. Now, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as Sandy said, did have the last say, and they voted against it. It wasn't close. It was a resounding no. But now we're down to two communities. Ignace, which is up in northern Ontario, close to Hudson Bay. So all that water is going into Hudson Bay. Now people say, well, out of sight, out of mind. That's going to be a huge transportation problem. That's going to be causing a lot of accidents in the winter and in the summer. We know.
Hold on, all the water, what water is
So,
going?
well, when you bury waste like this in containers that will inevitably have to be changed, we do not have containers that will last more than 500 years. So inevitably, humans are going to have to go down into the abandoned shafts and change those containers. The problem is the technology has not been developed in order to safely store the nuclear waste, hundreds of thousands of square cubic meters of low and intermediate waste, which would be stored separately from the highly dangerous, extremely dangerous, high-level nuclear waste. So there's no spot for that either. So what Sandy is saying is the concept, which was formulated by Dr. Gordon Edwards, a nuclear physicist, of rolling stewardship. Keep it above ground in containers so that over the next 7, 8, 10 centuries, we can keep an eye on it. But to bury it now next to the Great Lakes, when inevitably the Great Lakes are going to recede, they're going to go forward, there's going to be ice ages. And so the concept right now is to bury it and abandon it. Don't put any signage up. Don't attract attention to it. That's why they're looking at that tiny little area of Teeswater and putting boreholes down there. It's about 26 kilometers from the shoreline of Lake Huron. So the idea there is, okay, it's Teeswater or Ignace, and Ignace will never happen. It's too far north. It's too difficult. So it's going to be probably Teeswater. I would be willing to put my bet on it.
Where's Teeswater?
It's just about 100 kilometers north of London. I'm at Western University. It's directly north in the countryside, approximately 26 kilometers from the shoreline of Lake Huron. So it's the underground water systems that are key. And of course, there's really no safe place to bury it anywhere in Ontario. Before they looked at Manitoba, and that was rejected. The community there went down to Yucca Mountain in the United States, where the Americans were thinking about burying their waste, and then they said, no, we're not going to get involved. So the United States doesn't have a solution either, Meta. So if you're in international relations like me and you think about leverage, then where are we going to store? Should we store it in one spot, which is, I think, from a security, I teach international security, is a terrorist soft target. Threatening it is a soft target. So for the long run, it's actually safer now to keep it around all the nuclear reactors in North America, protected, secure, with the International Atomic Energy Agency looking over it until we figure out some storage containers or vitrification.
So what is that dot?
So this dot here, this
I'm not
is
seeing anything.
Teeswater. Yes.
So that is in the municipality of South Bruce. But what needs to be really communicated to the wider public is this is not just a local issue. And it is totally unacceptable that a single municipality, whether in Midwestern Ontario or up in Northern Ontario, be given the total right to say yes or no to this project, because again, the science is not there. There are still controversies about how safe the copper coating is on the canisters. That is still being researched by various universities in different countries. And there's still not enough data available about how radionuclides would actually impact on various organisms. And it's also totally untenable to suggest that those containers would last for a very long time, as Erica pointed out. And so there's all these questions that cannot be answered by current science and may never be able to be answered by science, because what we have to think about in terms of the water issue is the aquifers, you see, because once those containers do corrode and radionuclides are released, they go across the watersheds. So in Midwestern Ontario, it would go into the Teeswater River, then into the Saugeen River, which goes into Lake Huron. But also in the aquifers, it will eventually go go through other water pathways. And that's why a few minutes ago, Hudson's Bay was mentioned as eventually being where, the contaminated water would come out into Hudson's Bay, because that's how the watersheds interconnect up in
Up in
northern
England.
Ontario.
Yeah.
You see, so the water is a huge issue, and there is no guarantee about long-term safety. And the other major concern, which is just so shocking, really, is the reliance on computer modeling. Now, I've read books by a world-renowned physicist, Fritjof Capra. Now, he interviewed computer scientists about modeling the natural world, and the computer scientists told him that it is humanly impossible to mimic nature using computers, because our cognitive mind works in a particular way, and we put certain data into the computer and leave out other data. But that data then is static going into the computer, and our assumptions, our human assumptions, are going into that computer program. Meanwhile, the natural environment is constantly in flux. It is constantly changing. And then there will be the unknown future extreme weather events that cannot be predicted. So
Yeah, there's been fires in Mexico. They have been trying this, and they had a fire underground, so they couldn't use the underground system anymore. I mentioned Germany. Finland is trying to build a big borehole right now. They did get permission, and I want to highlight what Sandy is saying, which it's a travesty that only a few people will be able to decide on this. But in the end, the Canadian cabinet has to decide. And so I don't know if it will be Trudeau's government, but they've managed to extend out the NWMO, all of the hearings. They're constantly being extended. There's joint panels. They have scientists testifying. One scientist said this is like putting a little drop of food coloring in a swimming pool, conceptually, but actually it's not. It's extremely dangerous, because the radioactive waste will dissipate. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to understand the science behind it. I'm more interested in the fact that this is an international problem, Meta, that really should be decided by Canada and the United States. The United States does not allow nuclear waste within 10 miles of the Great Lakes. And similarly, I'm very concerned that we're using the water in Teeswater, which drains into Lake Huron and goes through a swamp, which is a provincially preserved swamp with birds. The tundra swans land there, and then they go up. Historically, for hundreds of thousands of years, they followed the ice, and they go up across Lake Huron to the Arctic. So they're going from Washington on. So all of these animals that fly will be able to fly overhead. The deer will be cut off from going in, and they will have huge fences around it for thousands of years, but they will not have security guards for thousands of years. It will be abandoned, an abandoned shaft. And we will be speaking different languages, Meta. We won't be speaking English anymore. So that all of the instructions will have to be there in different languages for centuries and centuries.
Your report specifically recommended when having these sites either to leave them unmarked, or if you do mark them, leave spaces on the marker for future languages. Because communicating into deep time, when you're talking about centuries or millennia, you have to, of course, acknowledge that languages change, forms of communication change. Look how long it took to decipher the hieroglyphics or the Mayan glyphs, and we still don't have a full understanding of those languages, and that's only 4,000 years or less compared to 10,000 or 25,000 for some types of radionuclides.
I wonder whether anybody in the U.S. has made such a demand or a request. Is there any initiative coming from people?
Oh, a tremendous amount. It's been in U.S. World Report. It's been in the U.S. News. Michigan senators, all of the fisheries in Michigan are up in arms. They've written to, they wrote to President Trump, and I'm sure they're writing to President Biden. But the issue doesn't resonate here in Ontario because so many people are dependent on the Bruce reactor for employment. So of course you're going to, if the Bruce reactor pays your employment, as it does in that small area, it's very dependent. Plus, as Sandy pointed out, they've shoveled tons of bribery money. Millions of dollars go to pay hockey rinks and to pay the community council whatever that they can conceive of so that they will say yes. So it's a form of bribery, Meta, and I find it personally offensive that I, living 100 kilometers south in London, Ontario, have absolutely no sway on this. And I regularly ask my students every year, have you heard of this? None of them. Not a single student has heard of them. One guy lived up there in Goderich, and he said, oh, he had kind of heard of something, but he didn't really know what it was. So it's being kept too secret.
In Canada, we have a crisis in journalism because the journalists are not doing their job. And, you know, some of the regional newspapers will publish letters to editors from citizens, and we're the ones educating the public. But then another issue, and it really concerns me since what happened in the Ontario provincial election, is public apathy. Apparently, we had a historic low turnout of voters in Ontario. And so we have challenges here which are related to the crisis in journalism, and proper investigative journalism on nuclear issues is not happening. And I think citizens need to actually write to various newspapers, to the editors and publishers, and say, we want information about the nuclear waste issue.
But I also think that there are a lot of people who have really been active on this, like Angela Bishop, who just sent us a question, has spent the last 30 years working on this. Gordon Edwards. It's just that the language is upsetting to people. Talking about nuclear waste and nuclear cancers and talking about these very depressing things, it is not attractive. It is not something that you want to devote your life to. Believe me, I would rather not be working on this topic. So I think the problem is, even if we were to get more media, I think that people just don't want to learn. And because it's upsetting. It's like learning about nuclear weapons, nuclear war, and so on. So with all due respect, I agree we need more journalists, but I also think we have to understand that the issue itself is off-putting.
It is, but more of the public needs to be engaged and to be informed, and they're not being informed. And therefore they're not engaged. And also in the municipalities, and this is what I intend to do in the coming year, because we have now only a window of a year and a bit before the site selection happens for the DGR, either in South Bruce or up in Ignis. And so therefore, what needs to be done is how to, for example, in Midwestern Ontario, need to really motivate a lot more farmers about how they could eventually be impacted, or the future of farming and agriculture. And we know right now that with the latest provincial bill, Bill 23, that the natural environment is under threat, because it's now the powers of conservation authorities are being even further reduced by the provincial government to protect wetlands and to protect, to keep our water safe. And so I think people are getting mobilized on that issue.
Oh, for sure they are. I mean, you talked about getting farmers motivated. The farmers around the Teeswater borehole, where NWO has bought such a huge area of land, are against it. And they actually ran in the municipal election. So one farmer, Michelle Stein, right next to it, ran for council. David Wall ran, another woman, Rita or something, ran for the mayor. Now they didn't win. And it's not surprising to me, because most of the employment is dependent on, not on farming, but on the Bruce reactor. And so most people know someone who works there and they need the money. The problem then, therefore, with the argument of getting the farmers, people active, like Bill Knoll was right around that area, very, very active. All those people are active. Once they learn about it, they're marching and so on. But the problem is that the locus of decision making cannot be at that local level. It has to be at the federal level, and it has to be an international decision. The United States has to participate because we share the Great Lakes. We share Lake Huron. And so I'm in international politics. This is an international relations topic. It's not municipal. And that's why I really think we need to get people involved on both sides of the border.
What I'm talking about, just to clarify, is I'm not speaking about the local farmers who are engaged. What it needs to go outside of South Bruce. It needs to
Yeah.
go to the regional area, all of the farmers in Ontario have to be awakened about this problem. And so that is the challenge, how to communicate the reality to farming organizations and so on, and have them speak out and say, we don't want this. Because
I have actually published quite a few articles on this, and two of them I purposely put into Municipal World, which is a free magazine that goes to all the municipalities, to all the bureaucrats. I figured, and they put the second one, front page, big nuclear waste and a dead tree and so on. But do I hear from anybody? No. People are very put off by this topic. It's sort of like talking about your bathroom or your toilet. Nobody wants to hear about it, right? So we want to enjoy nuclear energy. We want to have lights on and we want to live our lives. But in the end, we haven't solved this problem, and there is no problem. There is no solution right now. So what are we going to do? We have to wait for 100 years, maybe 200 years. And then maybe someone will invent something like vitrification, where we'll put everything in glass, huge tubes that terrorists cannot take the dangerous HEU or the uranium out. And then that will be stowed. But even then, we have the problem of water gradually seeping in and destroying the containers.
It looks like it's a few people in a local neighborhood or something that have the power to decide. When the government of Canada and the government of the US do not want to take it on as their province, their responsibility to handle, then how do you make them take it on?
Well, I said before, the cabinet will have to ultimately decide, Meta. So the liberal, right now, the liberal government will have to decide. We don't know what the government will be, but what Sandy is pointing to is that behind the scenes, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization has sped up the hearings, which, by the way, are incredibly tedious to listen to, boring and difficult. And I don't know anyone who wants to sit there for 8 or 10 hours of their life and listen to a lot of information on nuclear waste, which is delivered to us very slowly, so that you cannot really, I almost think it's like a strategy to bore us, scare us, and then don't talk about it. And so therefore, then they can just go ahead. So the key is, as Sandy's saying, is that in 2024, they will supposedly decide between Ignis in the north or Teeswater. But I imagine they will delay yet again another year, and then we'll be in an election period, and then it will not be an election issue, and then they will wait. So I'm not worried they're going to decide in the next 2 years because of their nature, which is to delay. This is a very, very potentially difficult issue for any government to decide upon. But in the end, it will have to be a cabinet decision. That it cannot be decided by the municipality.
There are a lot of activities happening at government levels. And so, for example, Brian Mass, who is the NDP MP for the federal government for Windsor, Essex, he has put a motion to the House of Commons to halt the DGR development until more independent studies could be done. And that's one of the links I can provide to anyone who wants to email me. I looked up that information yesterday, and there is a federal government website and where his whole motion is spelled out. And so I could give that link to anyone who wants to see that. But at the same time, that's going to be challenged by the Standing Committee for Sustainable Development, which put a report together. And I've read parts of it, but I also attended all of the sessions of the Standing Committee, which was focused on nuclear waste governance in Canada earlier this year, because some of us have to bear witness to what is being said, even if it's hours of, so-called boring content. It's not boring for those of us that are passionately fighting to stop unwise decisions that could harm the environment and human health. So I do spend hours out of my day to pay attention to these issues. And there's a report from the standing committee that is recommending the DGR, despite pointing out in its report that there are people speaking against it. So there are all these forces at work, and so the public again needs to be better informed about these issues.
I know, Sandy, you're a fantastic oral intervener. And you also are a doctor, and so you have a lot of credibility, but most of the people that are involved in this, so many people over the years have tended to kind of throw their hands up in the air and give up, because it is very time consuming and there's no money. You're not going to get paid for following all this. No one is going to pay the opposition, except for the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which does have some sort of office there, and they are supposed to give both sides of the story and so on. But it's really hard to stay focused on this issue.
Two other things happening right now too. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has put out a report, a draft report for public input, but that public input, actually, the deadline was today. But a number of the nuclear organizations who are fighting against nuclear waste as being proposed by the NWMO have refused to participate in this and respond to the report, because it might be looked as showing support for the fact that the federal government has given the NWMO full responsibility to design a strategic plan for all levels of nuclear waste in Canada. And this is something that needs, again, to be challenged. But there's that strategic plan report, which I think people ought to read in detail, and maybe go to other politicians, like don't respond to the NWMO about the content of the report, but go to your politicians and point out, information that's being misrepresented, for example, long-term safety and so on, which cannot be guaranteed. It's humanly impossible. And a good scientist, a scientist with integrity, would never suggest that long-term safety is possible. And also
at this time, I mean, you can nuance it and say that yes, in the future it may better be, because we have a big trouble.
Yeah.
But certainly there is nothing right now that is a viable container that will last for more than 500 years. And so the Russians have been dumping the containers into the Arctic Ocean, and they've already leaked.
Yeah, the Kara Sea and Barents Sea, it's quite significant. There's over 7,000.
Huge amounts of radioactive waste. The Japanese are dumping it into the Pacific Ocean. And so Canada, which is going to be standing at the forefront of this, because we are the ones that have to decide what to do. We looked at the continental shield, and in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, they suggested putting it in the old uranium mines. Saskatchewan said no. They would not bring back the waste into the uranium mines. Manitoba said no, as I mentioned earlier in this show. And so now we're looking at the Ontario waste, and that's Darlington, Pickering, which is about to have its license renewed for a few more years. So it will create more waste. And then, of course, Bruce, which is the largest operating nuclear reactor in the entire world. You think the one in Ukraine is big, the one at the Bruce reactor is the biggest operating reactor in the world. So the amount of waste that is there, we don't know, but it's going to have to be buried somewhere. Everything, all the concrete, all of the reactor, all of it will have to be put somewhere, not buried somewhere. I don't know what they're going to do with it. The waste from, when I visited the site, and you go through a lot of Geiger counters, and the IAEA is there, and they have these big trucks, and they have these huge bins as big as my office, huge, and they move them around and they count them and so on. And it's the most secure site I've ever been into, and I've been in a lot of secure sites, including NATO headquarters. It was more secure than NATO headquarters, with everything, dogs and so on. So imagine that, but it's underground, and it's approximately the size of the Toronto CN Tower underground. And then it's 7 kilometers of tunnels that will have to be built in limestone. And limestone is also highly water permeable. So that will have to be built. There could be accidents. It will cost approximately 18 billion, but the figure has gone from 13 to 18 billion. It's all over the place, as much as Canada's entire defense budget would go into building in this tiny little area of Teeswater, taking everything on the highways, passing right through where, I live, and going to one site. It boggles my mind.
High-level nuclear waste is also being planned to be transported all the way from New Brunswick and Quebec. So it's not only in Ontario.
If they build the site, we'll have to take New Brunswick's Point Lepreau, and also Quebec has said no to nuclear power, and so they're getting rid of their nuclear power as well. The Chalk River around Ottawa, that waste site will, I believe, continue to be built, possibly on the river there. And there's a huge groups of people in Ottawa, mainly retired people, who are absolutely opposed to that as well.
Right. They're taking some of the Chalk River waste down to Savannah, Georgia, which is about 1,200 as well.
Yeah, Kevin Camp knows a lot in the United States and Michigan. That we mentioned Angela Bischoff, but up in Ignis, there's a retired teacher, Dodie Legasic, who's done a lot of work on the transportation accidents. Dale Dewar out in Saskatchewan, she's a doctor, has just written a book about the effects of radiation on cancer and on your bodies and so on. Gordon Edwards, whom I mentioned, there's a few farmers that know about it, but really we're a pretty small group. I had a discussion group on Zoom over about 8 months, and we discussed every Thursday nuclear waste, but we decided to just disband because it just, there's so much to do that we literally have to focus our time, not on talking to each other, but on just work, and try to get people, as Sandy is saying, to know about this topic. Because I'm convinced the more that people know, the more wary they will be about the proposal.
Mhm.
Well, that's it, because, I became an activist involved with this as a person who was not at all involved with nuclear issues. I was focusing on cultural racism and systemic racism in regard to Indigenous peoples. That was my life's work, which I still want to be involved with. But obviously the environmental racism around the nuclear waste issue is it's interrelated with Indigenous communities. And so it's all interrelated.
It's
But,
totally.
So
You should speak more about that, Sandy, because it is a form of racism to say that we should dump our nuclear waste in the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation on their land. I mean, they never profited from this, except for now the problem is moving at 26 kilometers inland means it's a very small group. I think 1,100 people voted for the council. 1,100 showed up. And so, and then they re-elected their normal mayor as if nothing had happened. And, the London Free Press wrote an article, they called me, but really this is an issue that should be taken up at the highest levels in the United States. And I think actually probably the most useful thing people watching this could do would be to write to a congressperson, write to an American congressperson in Michigan and tell them that you're really worried this is all going to be decided in a year. I think that would have more of an impact than meeting with your own member of parliament. In my case, it's Peter Fragskatos, and he has not said anything against it. He's a Liberal. He will vote with the Liberals if they do vote in favor of it, but he won't have any power on this issue.
Down in the U.S. has been meeting with Congress folks and senators regarding this exact thing of the transportation nuclear waste.
Yeah, the transportation is a big concern. So moving it on the highways, because they had thought about a train system, but there's no train line railroad that's going up to Goderich. So, and they will not construct one so it will be in trucks being literally thousands and thousands of truckloads of nuclear waste going for 3 hours from Pickering through Toronto up to.
If I have to pick what I would spend my time worrying about, I think I would be most worried about the fact that you have to transport all that stuff through places where there are people, Yeah.
There are a number of concerns around the transportation with trucks and trains. Regarding trucks, the trucks are used to transport them are often designed for applications within nuclear facilities, so they're traveling at low speeds. The shielding is predominantly for the driver, and they're often designed to handle either liquid or solid waste, not both. So in the case when you're having it go down the highway, there's oftentimes when, the driver's shielded, the people in the adjacent cars may not be shielded depending on the type of waste that's being transported. In other cases, the concerns is around impacts. And if you're traveling at 120 kilometers an hour down the 401 with nuclear waste and you get into an accident, they're not necessarily certified for collision speeds at that speed. The other thing is that municipal emergency services, fire, police, ambulance, may not have the training to deal with radioactive waste and radioactive spills, nor would they necessarily be aware that this is even being transported through their municipality. There's a big issue with the rail lines here in Ontario, not notifying emergency services or municipalities that they were transporting hazardous waste on the rail lines. So we have explosive and toxic chemicals going through downtown Toronto on the Davenport rail line. They weren't notifying any of the emergency services what was on these cargo cars. So if you have an accident and you have a high level or medium level radioactive waste spilled all over the place, you could have people exposed to days.
But it wouldn't be high level. I don't think they would move high level, Adam. It would be low and mid. And I only say that because we have to be super careful that we don't say that they would travel, that the high level waste, that would have to go under extremely secure convoy.
Would it though?
I can't imagine how they would move that.
For example, some of the liquid waste at Chalk River, how is that being transported down to Savannah?
I don't know.
Some of that is quite bad, and
really?
it's very toxic. Yeah.
I remember Jean Chrétien, I did write an op-ed on this with Gordon Edwards. He, when he was prime minister, he used a helicopter as a test to move the waste from the United States to Canada. Yeah. And they criticized that later, that there wasn't enough environmental protection to move it in the air. But this is interesting. The high level waste is going to have to go somewhere at some point, but there will be a lot less of it. It's the intermediate and the low level waste, which is most of the waste that will be going on the highway in these convoys. And I don't know if you've seen in Germany, but protesters gather around it. Today I was looking on Twitter. They will film it and they'll film the convoy. Japanese have huge problems with the public being opposed to nuclear waste. And there's, I believe, a boat that hasn't been able to land. It's got nuclear waste on it. It's a ship and it can't go anywhere. They don't know what to do with it. So it's like talking about poop and what are you going to do with it? I've changed a lot of diapers in my life, Meta, and I don't mind talking about this sort of stuff. But I don't know why we didn't solve this problem way back in the 60s when they first built it at Doug.
Because the nuclear fuel has to cool, has to have cold water to cool. So this is the other thing, that even if God forbid the DGR does happen, the point is that when people argue about the security issue, I mean, the people that want it to happen, they forget that there is still going to be nuclear fuel cooling for at least 10 years or longer at the nuclear reactors before it can be transported to wherever it would be buried or wherever it would be stored if we could, keep with like full 24/7 monitoring above ground and have it stored responsibly, right?
Yeah, no, I saw those heavy water storage units around the Bruce reactor, many of them, and they're just situated around the reactor.
That's why all the nuclear facilities around the Great Lakes are right on the shoreline. That's why they are on the shorelines. And this is true internationally because they need to be near large bodies of water but this is another issue, that bodies of water in lakes and the oceans of the world are warming through climate change, right? They're becoming warmer and warmer. And there's issues around, for example, whitefish populations are diminishing in Lake Huron. And this is an issue of concern for Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, and also the Métis Nation of Ontario. I was on a webinar 2 days ago on about Lake Huron, which was hosted by the International Joint Commission on the Great Lakes. And I was hearing from the Métis Nation of Ontario about how the whitefish populations have diminished. And so they are concerned, as are the First Nations, about what's happening to the fish which they rely on so much, right?
Ontario gets a lot of its water from Lake Erie and from London gets all of its water from Lake Huron and Lake Erie at the Grand Bend water thing, which is just south of the Goderich one. And but in terms of accidents and so on, I am very worried, as you're pointing out before, about terrorism and putting all the waste in one area. But every time I bring this up, the scientists or the public relations people will say that is a security threat, and we have testimony behind closed doors about that, Dr. Simpson, and so you cannot hear what we're saying, but we can assure you that it will all be okay. And I just say to myself, well, we never expected that the Russians would bomb the largest reactor in Europe, the Ukrainian reactors. Yesterday they bombed all 3 reactors are no longer working, all 3. Because purposely the Russians have destroyed them. They have destroyed the power. They have destroyed the electricity. You know, like just in my lifetime, this is insane, let alone talking about thousands of years into the future when we're all dead.
My understanding is that no reactors as such were built to withstand a direct war. I mean, somebody bombing them or something, that however hard the the reactor shields are, they're not that strong. Well, what's the situation about the containers with the waste products? Are they able to withstand a war where somebody is deliberately, let's say you have a crazy person, and I can think of 2 or 3 that have a lot of power nowadays who are really crazy, in my opinion, and how they could very well decide to do something absolutely, like an Armageddon, to puncture one of these containers or something, out of what kind of emotional peak might motivate them. I don't know, but any number of things could happen in a war. And I want to know that whatever people are thinking of, it's not just, nature that they're going to try to protect these waste products from, but stupid people.
Yeah, at Pickering and at Darlington, they're allowed to shoot down a plane that would go over Pickering and Darlington that looked like it was an enemy adversary. So they're equipped to do that inside the reactor. But I mean, if it was an all-out assault like Vladimir Putin has done, then of course no nuclear reactor site is safe. And that gets back to the issue of putting it so close to the Great Lakes, to the source of water for 40 million people in North America. It defies understanding that you would contaminate the largest number of lakes, the freshest water in the world. Why would we do that? And it seems counterintuitive to me. So, and to add to it, to bring in the waste from New Brunswick and so on. So, but there will be leverage, and there will be discussions, and the Americans have a huge amount of waste, and they will look up north and say, Canada seems like a good spot. And this will cost a lot to build it. So if it's $18 billion, we might say, well, we'll rent you a little bit, a spot here in the long run. So this problem will be around well past my lifetime. And I think it's a problem of huge consequences, not just for Canada, but for the world. And I hope that your audience will become motivated and will become involved. Although, as I keep emphasizing, it's pretty depressing.
Finland is the first country in the world who has been constructing the first DGR based on the Swedish KBS-3 design, which is the design that has been adapted for Canada by the NWMO. So Finland is going to be the first international, it will have the first DGR internationally in the world, but it still has not received an operating license, which probably will not happen until 2024. And I was looking up information last night to be up to date, and I read an excellent science article, which if anybody wants to email me, I would like to send a link out to people. And it was pointing out too that even once the DGR in Finland for high level waste starts to operate, it's going to be continuing to tunnel and extend its tunnels through many years. Like it's, in other words, the shaft may be fully constructed to take down the fuel bundles, but the tunneling will still continue. So again, this is an experiment. How do we know what's going to happen to rock that fractures underground, and as some catastrophe could happen because of the fractured rock? And then going back to one of the other dangers about the DGR is it's not just about the shafts that are going underground hundreds of meters. It's the above ground, what's called the encapsulation plant. So what a lot of people may not know also is that aside from all of these fuel bundles being transported long distances from other provinces to the proposed DGR, is that an above ground plant then has to unpack all of these fuel bundles from the trucks and repackage them. And it is so highly dangerous and so highly radioactive that robots are going to be doing it. So that's like another huge potential of accidents that can happen, human accidents, mechanical accidents, God knows, even above ground before it starts getting placed underground.
Back to what Erica said about the notion of having employment in these towns. The towns that the reactor's in are often industry-related towns. And along the Great Lakes, we have a lot of industrial and former industrial towns. So in Pickering, the largest employer is the reactor. In neighboring Ajax, it was munitions production during the war. In Oshawa, it was General Electric. And of course, we had mass unemployment with GE closest Oshawa offices. In Bruce, it's also the reactors, the larger employment. So as you said, no politician wants to touch that. But my father actually grew up about a block away from the Pickering reactor and remembers as a young child, they had a very strong publicity campaign for the reactor. They would used to go around to the schools and the households and round up all the children and the mothers and the parents and take them down to the reactor for an education day. And they would give the kids a chunk of uranium ore and a Geiger counter. You got to wave it around and make the buttons go off. And they were trying to think this is a very normal thing to have in your community and to allay their fears. Of course, there was no discussion back in the 60s of the nuclear waste in the community at all.
Well, you can get free iodine pills if you live within, I think it's...
I actually have some around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They give it to you for free. And that won't protect you from the radiation, but it will protect your thyroid from the radiation. But that's in a sense a placebo, because if there was to be a nuclear accident like in Chernobyl at Pickering, then it would hit as far as Toronto and so on, and it would be highly. Now I believe I did write an article in the wake of a near kind of issue there, and I believe the town council has now voted against extending the. Not the refurbishment, but the continued use of Pickering. But Doug Ford has decided to use it because remember, we're pretty reliant, unlike Quebec, on nuclear energy. So I think 40% of Ontario's energy comes from nuclear reactors, whereas in Quebec, they get most of their energy from hydroelectricity and solar and so on. So we need to move toward those alternative forms of energy as well, and that's a huge issue as well. I really want to flag Angela Bishop and the work she's been doing, and Brennan Lloyd for Nuclear Waste Watch is a volunteer who has a very active group. So if people who listen want to become involved, those are just Google Nuclear Waste Watch, Google Angela Bishop, Google Gordon Edwards, the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility, and so on. And if you have some extra money, then I'm not sure where you can give it to, because all these organizations have really no money. They're not charitable foundations. So we just do it for free. I never take a cent. It's all just part, and you can't take any money from the nuclear industry. Otherwise they'll say that you've been bought. Mm-hmm. So never take any money for any consulting or do anything like that. Everything has to be free.
Up a future discussion about vitrification, so I'm just going to send out an email to I guess all of you about.
No, add your little piece, and
I think vitrification would be good for a discussion on its own, because it's becoming what they call the workhorse of nuclear waste management. It's been around for 40 or 50 years at this point, if not longer, and India adopted it quite early. But the United States has just invested $17 billion in a vitrification plant at Hanford to process their various nuclear waste products. So vitrification is when you take radioactive waste or another substance and you entomb it in glass, which is a relatively stable compound for a long period of time. There's some natural glasses that last over 1 million years. So this is being explored as, like I said, the workhorse for potential future nuclear waste management, and in some cases already existing nuclear waste management. The problem with some of the current waste storage solutions is that on a atomic and molecular level, radioactive compounds tend to degrade other compounds. You get radiolytic reactions. We've seen that in one of the US underground storage facilities when they were using cat litter to store some of the nuclear waste in barrels, and somebody bought the wrong brand of cat litter that had organic compounds in it, and this induced an explosion with the radioactive substances producing heat and gases that reacted with the organic cat litter instead of inorganic cat litter and blew up a barrel. And it caused a multi-million-dollar, multi-month, if not multi-year shutdown of the nuclear waste facility, all because someone bought the wrong brand of cat litter that was being used for the storage. Now, at Hanford, we're also seeing that's one of the oldest waste sites in the United States. A lot of the radioactive compounds that are man-made, this is the first time we're seeing them in history. So how they interact with other substances over time is an entirely new field in itself. There's models, of course, but when you bury something in the ground, and in some cases they put it in cardboard boxes and threw it in a tank, over time, how those degrade and how they interact with other compounds around them is very different from what is in a laboratory setting. So that's another challenge when they're opening up some of these old storage tanks of what the hell's in here. And records weren't always necessarily kept at some of these sites. And I was very interested, I think Sandy, or was it you, Erica, that mentioned the United States has a policy not to store waste within 10 miles of the Great Lakes. Detroit, actually 3 years ago this weekend, had a nuclear waste dump at the Revere Copper site, which is from the Manhattan Project, that they are storing right on the banks of the Detroit River.
Well, that's interesting.
It fell into the Detroit River over the Thanksgiving weekend. They didn't find it for 3 or 4 days, and it had floated downstream. And this is one of those old legacy sites from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands of pounds of radioactive byproducts from the weapons development just sitting on the shore of the Detroit River.
Well, Port Hope is a huge problem from the Canadian side.
Yeah, they built
in terms of nuclear waste. And there are people who have been active there, but that town is also doesn't want to talk about it because their housing properties go down and they can't sell their houses as much as they'd like to. So trying to remember, Faye Moore is very active in terms of there's a nonprofit organization there, and she's been living there, but she says that Port Hope is undergoing a $1.28 billion federally funded cleanup, 1.28, and that's not going to be enough.
St. Mary's Elementary School in Port Hope was built directly on top of infill with radioactive waste, and they actually found the gymnasium was radioactive. This is going back a few decades. Had to shut the school down because the kids were sitting on top of a nuclear waste dump. Yeah.
And we just didn't know about all that stuff. So imagine how much more we'll know about the waste that is being transported, or it's already, much of it has been transported to the Bruce reactor. So a lot of it already is there in their waste facility above ground. And then they'll have to build the shaft, and then they'll have to build the tunnels. And there could be fires, there could be accidents, there could be terrorism, all sorts of things. And that's the legacy of the nuclear reactors.
Ole Hendrickson.
Yes.
He could speak at a future time about Chalk River. He's done a lot of research about that and has been very actively involved for many years. And he's got an excellent scientific background. So he would be a very good presenter to speak about Chalk River.
Elizabeth May also has spoken a lot about nuclear waste, and she's very active. She's now the leader of the Green Party again, and I really think that she might come on your show. I do think she would, Meta. So those, and if you could get Gordon Edwards, that would be great. Gordon Edwards, Ole Hendrickson, and then Elizabeth May, to make it more of a personal political thing, would be a good combination. Hey, I have to go. It's so great to see all of you. I have to go.
Well, I gotta go too. We gotta cut this off, and we're overtime.
Thank you.
Been
Cut out this last
very
part.
important to have this conversation. Should have had it a year or two ago. So hang in there, guys, and keep up the good work.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Project Save the World produces these shows. This is episode 526. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, to savetheworld.ca. You can share your information there about 6 global issues. And to find a particular talk show, you can enter the title or the episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can subscribe for $20 Canadian per year. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser, and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see buttons to click to subscribe.